Welcome to the Queer Love Podcast, the silly and serious shenanigans of two queer relationship coaches. I am your host, Elizabeth Cunningham.
And I'm your host, Lee Greeps.
On this podcast, we talk about how to live your best queer life with fulfilling, healthy relationships and anything else that makes your little queer heart happy. Because living your life outside of the heteronormative scripts is totally possible for you.
Each episode, we explore all things queer love from our professional perspective as relationship coaches, our own personal experiences, and as partners.
If you love our show, follow us on TikTok, Instagram, or Twitter at Queer Love Relationships. You can also check out our website, www.queerloverelationships.com.
Thanks for following us and enjoy this episode.
In identifying as an atheist, one of the things that I realized as I started to go down this healing path in like my mid to late 20s was that I absolutely had, religion and spirituality collapse. Hello. Welcome to the Queer Love Podcast.
Woo, 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 woo. We'll see if it captures it. Yeah.
We'll see. We shall see. We're not recording on Zoom today. We are recording on Descript, so we'll see how Descript does. We're doing a quicker episode today.
Another quickie
today. And what are we talking? What's our episode about today?
Another quickie. Our quickie is on our thoughts and reflections. I remember the reflections word, but I'm like, what was the other one? Thoughts and reflections.
There you go.
From our conversation.
Nailed it.
From last episode.
With Chamonix.
Chamonix, all about internal family systems, aka IFS. IFS.
IFS. Yeah, and also our thoughts and reflections on it, and just kind of tying in how it's applicable,
grounding it in,
how it's applicable to queer relationships and how that can look and manifest in different ways that you can use and interact with the tools and modality of IFS.
Yeah,
cool. Would you like to go first?
No, I want to hear your first thought. First thought / reflection.
The first thought that I have was actually something. So after we recorded the episode last night, we were talking about our reflections about the episode, the three of us. And one of the things that we brought up was how useful it is to use parts work in conversations as a way to de-escalate conversations. So instead of, and I also want to caveat this with like, this is not a way to skirt around responsibility or accountability for how you feel or what's going on for you. It's more of just a way to name what's going on for you that isn't accusatory or blame of yourself or anyone else in the situation. So how that can look is if you're upset with someone, if you're upset with your partner, you can say something like, a part of me is really upset with you because there's lots of parts of you, right? And there's also probably a part of you that really cares about this person. There's also the self energy of you that always comes from unconditional love. So that part of you still loves this person, unconditionally. But there's a part of you that's really upset. So when you say something like, a part of me is really upset with you, Ooh, okay.
That's you.
So when you say something like, a part of me is really upset with you, then now we're talking about this part instead of like, I am upset with you, right? Like it takes some of the charge out of the situation and just being like, a part of me is really upset that you did this, or a part of me is really upset that you said this, right? And so being able to approach difficult situations and conversations from a parts work perspective de-escalates the situation. You're still taking accountability and responsibility for that part of you. Like, you're not skirting away from, you're not like, oh, well, a part of me felt that way, but it wasn't me, so we're fine. It's like, that's not what we're saying. It's like, a part of me was really upset about that, and like, I would really love to talk about that, right? Or I would really love to work through that, or I'd really love to understand more about that, or I'm trying to be compassionate, but I'm having a hard time. Yes, and then that also allows for the two of you to stay connected during that as well, because if we're talking about a part of us, then there's still that other part of us that's still connected with that person. So it allows to maintain connection and conflict, or it's easier, or rather a pathway to maintain connection during conflict as well, when we're using the language of parts work, using the language and the modality of parts work.
Yeah. I mean, I think it does just help just to separate what is actually happening. And then I think even Shaw was saying, like, you know, if it's like, oh, a part of me feels angry that a part of you wanted that, right, or did that, whatever. And so it's like, so it's, you know, because she was speaking about it of like the self is acting on behalf of like the mediator between the parts of yourself and the parts of like your partner or whoever it is that you're talking with, right? Like, it's like you are advocating, you are speaking on behalf of that angry part or that hurt part, that disappointed part, whatever was present for you. And so being able to, you know, it's like we're at the table and it's like, okay, you have this little hurt part, I have this little angry part. And so we're, you know, taking that ownership of our parts, right? Like, of knowing like, yeah, like, this is, you know, my responsibility, and you know, that the self-parenting or self-mentoring, you know, whatever it is that you know, really aligns with you in that sense of these parts, then allows you to go, all right, I got you, I hear you, you're throwing a little fit over there, you know, because you're feeling like that part is feeling so angry, and it's like, hey, like, I'm gonna talk to E about that, like, don't worry, right? Like, we're gonna get this sorted out. And like, you don't have to worry about, you know, like that part, like, you don't have to worry about thrashing and screaming so that you feel heard. Like, I hear you, I got you, I'm not leaving you, and I'm going to get this cleared up, right? And so it's like, you don't have to worry about it. And so then it's like, that's the energy that you're then bringing into the conversation with a partner. And, you know, maybe your partner is over there like, yeah, the the part in them that feels really scared because of, you know, the upset, angry part in you. It's like, okay, so that's the part that they're, you know, speaking on behalf of, right? Where they're going, hey, little one, all good. Like, I got you. I see you're scared. I'm gonna take care of that. Like, I'm gonna go talk with Lee. We're gonna sort this out, right? You know, and because it's like you're offering that unconditional love to yourself, to all your parts, right? And then you're also offering that unconditional love to the person who you're talking with. And so, you know, and of course that's like, yeah, it's not like, okay, well, let's see, like, we are so zen talking, here we are. Like, no, like, but it allows just that, like, that separation. Like, it reminds me what I was seeing it as when we're talking about it and like reflecting on it. It's like, it's when you know, you do some sort of mindfulness practice, meditation, or whatever it is that allows you to slow down, to build in that little bit of a pause. Like, could be the slightest bit of a pause before a reaction where you can kind of go, whoo, I'm not going to say that, right? Like, that's going to be really bad if I say that. Like, you can kind of take a moment to just go, whoo. Like, that's the thing that comes from mindfulness practices over, you know, over a course of time, is like, that's what you're building. And so doing this, like, using the language of parts work allows you to build just that little bit of a gap, that little bit of a separation from, I am upset, you are bad. You know, I am upset, you are scared, And so now that's how we're talking about this. Like, it's like you don't have that separation. And so it's really hard, if not like impossible, to be able to connect in that, because it's like, it's just the angry and the sad. And it's like, you can't connect in the sense of, yeah. And also there's a part in me that, you know, absolutely adores Elizabeth, right? Like, there's a part of me that like is like, oh my God, this is what, you know, like, you know, and or it's just like, then there's just the self that knows what, he is just a human like me, number one. And so it's like, I can, and that's kind of, you know, that was something that my reflections are just coming out my mouth.
I love it. I'm here for it.
But like but like, it is that the importance, the emphasis that comes from IFS, you know, in that more spiritual component, right, of being like self God, you know, your inner God, their inner God, seeing each other in that, right, and not being pulled apart by like all the things of that comes with the human experience. And so it's like you're able, like, if you can like tap into that connection with one another, even when things are really hard, even when there's no clear solution in sight, or if you're very clear that there will be no clear solution in sight for quite some time, if ever, right, that you still come back to that space of the unconditional love that is present, and the compassion that is then born from that, the understanding, the willingness to understand, willingness to be present, and not just be completely blinded by, I'm right, you're wrong, I'm good, you're bad, like whatever that thing that really tears us apart. But we're actually in that space of like which is the challenging space, to allow for all the nuances and understanding. Yeah, there's a lot at play here. It's not just these two little parts playing. There's all these other parts also, and then there's the self. So it's like, yeah, it feels challenging, but it's also like that will allow a lot more breath in the experience, and in the experience of conflict, like you were bringing up.
Yeah. Anything else that, or I guess what comes up for me is that I wanted to reflect on inside of what we talked about on the last episode, is the spiritual component that Shaw was talking about. And that was something that we debriefed as well after the episode, because, you know, we know, especially as queer people, that there can be a lot of religious trauma, spiritual trauma, for a variety of reasons. One of the main ones being like being rejected by your religious or spiritual community, or abandoned, or ostracized, or treated poorly, or even abused, or traumatized by all of these things are traumatizing by your religious or spiritual community. And you know, all three of us have gone through our own journey of spiritual healing from either religious or spiritual trauma. And so we kind of unpacked that after the episode. We didn't record that. So I also wanted to just share a little bit about what we unpacked too. And I'll just share from my personal experience, then you can share yours. But my personal journey with like healing from religious or spiritual trauma, I guess, is that, you know, I identified as an atheist for, you know, from middle school, like all through college, after college, you know, in some aspects, I still identify as an atheist. Like, I don't believe in like in like an all-knowing God, like in the Christian sense, or in, you know, certain religious sense where it's just like there's this like man in the sky. I don't believe that. However, like part of my, in identifying as an atheist, one of the things that I realized as I started to go down this healing path in like my mid to late 20s was that I absolutely had, religion and spirituality collapsed.
Mhm.
Like religion and spirituality were the same thing for me up until that point. And I started to separate religion and spirituality because you can be a religious person and not be a spiritual person, and you can be a spiritual person and not be a religious person.
Right.
And you can be both for sure, but
Yeah.
but that's being two things, not being one thing. And so as I started to unpack that for myself, I realized that where the problems that I had were with religion and not spirituality, because I very much believe in people's right to, and not to say that I don't know if I'm going to say this the way that I'm thinking it, but then it's not perfect. Okay. So the way that I'm thinking it is like that I really believe in everyone's right to be fully self-expressed in as long as you're not causing harm for other people, right? Like I believe in your right to believe what you want to believe and to have the experiences that you want to have, and to whatever that is. Like, who am I to say how to live your life, right? And I believe that I guess if there's anything that I think that we should all believe, I believe it's that. Like I guess if there's anything that I'm religious about.
I mean, it makes sense though.
Yeah.
Because if self-expression, if it's genuine,
right,
and not directed by wounds,
right, it's self-expression.
Yeah, then it's like,
there's no expectation of other people.
Come back to the self that Shaw was talking about in IFS, right? With unconditional love. If that is the way you are expressing yourself from that place, you're not gonna harm someone. Like in the sense of like malicious, like you might rub up against someone's like, ooh, and then
you might trigger people.
Invites the healing,
yeah,
so that we can all come from that self, right? So.
Right, which I think then that's a whole different topic to unpack.
That was a good one.
That's a juicy one.
Oh my god,
that's a really good one actually. But in our conversation last night, just talking about my personal experience and unpacking that, like it's easier for me to talk about these conversations that are more spiritual or invoking things that are more spiritual, because I've unpacked that for myself. But I know that when I was 25, anytime before basically me being 25 or 26, listening to that episode, that past episode that we did with Shaw, would have been really difficult for me, and or I would not have listened to it. Right? Yeah. Like I wouldn't have. Yeah.
It's so funny.
I just wouldn't have listened to it. I would have just been like, this is a crock of shit. I don't know what you're talking about. And I wouldn't have listened to it. And
so we're so different. It's so funny. Yeah. In that regard. Like we're just so different. I'm like, I would have been eating that.
No, I would have been like, this is a crock of shit. Like, what are you even talking about? Like, get out of here with this stuff. Like that's how I would have approached,
That's completely fair.
Yeah, that last episode. And I think especially since doing this spiritual healing, even at age, like 28, 29, I would have been able to listen to, like, I might not have agreed.
Yeah, but listen to the conversation.
Yeah, like, I might not have agreed, but I would have listened to that last episode and be like, okay, that's an interesting perspective. Like, I can see how you would feel that way. Or not even like I can see, but like, I understand that you feel that way.
Yeah.
Right? Where then, in these past like 5 years, as I've not just gone through spiritual healing, but spiritual growth, now I'm like, wow, I really see what you're talking about. I really understand what you're talking about. Not just I understand that you're saying this, but like I actually understand what you are talking about. And I'm not like trying to I'm not necessarily trying to advocate for spirituality by saying that, but rather just sharing my own journey and perspective and like where I would have been at and where I am at with like having these types of conversations.
Right.
Yeah.
Which I think is very helpful because I'm sure there's plenty of people out there that were like,
yeah.
woo!
and also like coming back to, you know, how I look at that as a queer person is that I see for myself, you know, like again, one of the beauties I think about being queer is that if you do choose to, you know, unpack these types of things for yourself and go on like a healing journey, even if you're not like you don't want to be spiritual necessarily, but you do want to have healing around past spiritual wounds, right? Like when you do choose to go on these journeys, that you do discover things about yourself and about life and about people that like are rather, again, I keep saying you, but like turning it around to me, like that I would not have discovered if I hadn't been queer, you know? Because it's just like when you're rejected by a community, it's you're forced to look at it a different way. And then if you choose to heal from that rejection, then there's like a whole world possible of inside of that healing, right? And a different way to look at things inside of that healing. So I'm not like happy for trauma, but it is kind of one of those like, okay, that did happen, you know, and also I'm at this stage glad that it happened.
Yeah. Well, even just on that note, I mean, this will tie into like my own experience with that, but that's something that I see a lot with queer folks, you know, in working with them as clients and also just like my friends and myself. But like, truly, I see it in that like the nature of the common wounds that come with being queer in this current world and society is like rejection, abandonment, not enoughness, not worthy,
not valued.
Yeah, like not like all like these, you know, very common experiences and like coming from the, you know, because it's obviously not only queer people that experience those wounds, but like coming from the experience of a queer person in this world where you like there is just rejection abound on a like macro to micro scale.
Right.
And so when you start to go into the work of like, I want to heal, you know, within relationships, like I want my relationships to be better. Yes. And so you start to dive into these, you know, the limiting beliefs or these wounded parts, right? And then in that experience of healing and, you know, the renegotiation of that trauma from like whatever it is, you know, if it's in a religious sense, yes. If it's not in a religious sense, still the experience is that you come into that space of the healing of the oneness where you are then feeling into the spirituality of it, right? And if you're healing that from a religious space, you're going to, you know, this is what I like with your experience where you separated religion and spirituality, right? Because there's so often that's collapse and like that. So from my experience, like I was raised Catholic, which is not always a friend to the queers. But like I have always been a very spiritual being. Like as a little kid, like I just, you know, I didn't see it as that as a little kid or anything, but like the experience of me in, you know, growing up, going to church and, you know, communion, confirmation, like I did all the things. I just didn't do the marriage sacrament. But like, you know, you know, all of that, you know, I know a lot of with the Bible and all the rituals, right? But in that experience, it was very clear, and I think it's because of my just innate kind of nature to be more in that spiritual realm, is that it became very clear to me. I'm like, all this religion stuff, like, you're actually trying to block people from being with God. Like, that's what it felt like for me. Like, when they would say stuff, like, I remember as a third grader, when you're doing first communion, like, you're about third grade age. I remember being in one of those classes, and they said something, and I was like, what? Like, what do you mean you can't, receive God because of this thing? Right? Like, I'm like, what? That's not how that works. Like, God is all around. You are God. Like, as a little kid, like, those things were very clear to me. So I have a very different experience than most queer people would have, right? And then in that, I was just like, what? But because of that, I was like, oh, I'm not going to take all this stuff in church at face value. Like, I'm going to take what works for me. I love learning about all the archetypes of the people, of the philosophy, the theology, the symbolism. Like, I love all of that. And I love that, not even just in the Christian faith, right? Like, I love learning about all kinds of different religions and their beliefs, because it's so fascinating. Like, because it will all bring you back to the one thing. Like, it's all these different pathways that people are trying to reach God, and it's a whole other conversation, but that's why it's so fascinating for me. But in that experience, I remember when I then, was realizing, as I'm like, oh, I'm gay. And I'm still going, I remember in confirmation, like, as a high schooler. And so at that point, I already knew I was gay. I wasn't out yet, but, like, at that point. And I just remember just seeing, like, it became more apparent of, like, people who were like, oh, gay people are wrong. Gay people are, going to hell and all these things. And it kind of got in my head a little bit, because I was like, wait, what if I'm actually wrong? Right? And so I started to think, oh no, like, what if I'm actually wrong? Like, what if I actually don't have access to God because my true expression, my self-expression is queer. And I remember being, like, feeling so heartbroken at that, where I was like, I'm going to lose God. Like, I'm going to lose that channel that has felt so clear for me. Like, what? Really? And I remember, like, being in this experience, and I'm just like, no. Like, I've always done praying. Like, it's, very meditative experience for me. And I do my own way. It's not just, like, the Catholic way. But, like, I'm, like, my experience of what prayer is for me, right? And I remember, like, my spirituality is what allowed me to actually come out, right? Like, I remember I was crying so much. I was, like, so scared. And I was like, what? God, I thought we were homies. Like, seriously? Like, is that actually what's true? Like, I don't know. And it was, like, at that point, I wanted to share with my mom that it was gay. And then I was like, but she's Catholic. Oh, no. Like, she's going to not. And then I don't have God either. Like, it's like, this is a really shit show. This is unfair. I don't like it. But in that prayer experience, I was like, I was doing it as I was walking with my mom. I could not talk because I was so, like, frozen in the experience. And I was just, like, praying in that of just, like, look, God, like, legitimately, I don't know. Like, if this is the last thing you help me on, fine. But, like, I need help. Like, am I supposed to say something or not? Like, that's it. And as we're walking in little suburbia in Southern California, where there's never any other animals besides dogs and cats, there was a white horse. And it's just being walked by someone on the trail that we were on. Never have I seen that. Never have I seen it anymore. Like, this is the first time. And I, like, instantly, I saw that. It was, like, literally, I asked for that. Around the corner came the white horse. Like, I see it still so clearly. And I was like, instantly, I felt, like, the unconditional love. Like, it was like, no. Like, wait, don't let these humans mess with you like that. And it's like, a white horse is very symbolic of, like, freedom.
Right.
Right? And so it's like, free yourself. What is going to free you right now? And it's like, but like, in that moment, I was like, I am always held. Like, God is not gone, because I have that unconditional love. Like, I feel it. That is God. That is me. And it's all around, right? Like, it's always been very clear. And like, but I remember that moment. And then I came out to my mom, and she was very receptive and loving and amazing and all of those things, right? But it was just like, that was the, like, all of that was what I needed to really heal for myself around spirituality or religion. Like, I mean, it was really like religious, because it's like my spiritual component has always been separate, but it was like that doubt that I had was starting to collapse them. Right. And so, but that, like, that moment, I was like, oh no, like, it is not the same. Like, religion is where humans get, and if you look at like the stem of religion and all, I mean, it's not just Christianity, like all of it, right? Like, it's a lot of power dynamics of like in the human world, right? And so it's like, no one is blocked, like no one can actually block your access to God or source or unconditional love, spirit, whatever it is, right? Like that, and in that freedom though, like that has helped me so tremendously as a queer person in a world where I do feel very rejected often, or outcasted, isolated. But it's like, but I always have that sense of like, no, but I'm always held. Like, yeah, it's really hurtful, all the things that like people can say or do, because I'm queer. But like in the end of it, I'm like, but it's not true when they tell, like, I've been told I'm going to hell and all kinds of different things, like, yelling it at my face, all these things. And I'm like, that is like all the wounds and like all the just messed up things that we put into our human brains through like these different belief systems and stuff. And it's just like, no, but like that like cord that I have always felt with spirituality and like God and oneness and all this stuff, like it's like that feels like such a solid cord in me. And so it's like, but that, because I have that experience where I'm like, no, like that is such a key in my experience of being a queer person. And so when I see that with queer clients, being able to tap into that more, because there is so much shit that like a lot of folks have to work through to be able to even tap into that idea, like as a valid possibility, right? Like once that is able to be opened up more, like I see the settling into the experience of being queer. Like I see that like, oh, actually there is nothing wrong with me. Like I can love myself fully. I can let myself fully be expressed. And it's like, that is so key then to how you show up in the world. Number one, how you show up in your relationships, and how you see your partners or how you see your friends, because it's like you're no longer coming from that space where you're like, I am alone, I am not loved, I am, out in the world unworthy of all the good things that, other people can have. Now you're in that space where you're like, no, like I can have a good life. Like I deserve that. I deserve to be fully expressed. I deserve to be fully loved and treated well and with respect. And that gives you so much more empowerment. And so it's like, I can understand where like the conversation we had with Shaw is like can be very challenging, and it's like,
or triggering,
and also within that, it's like really looking at like, what is your relationship to these words like spirituality or religion or God, like looking at your relationship to those terms, relationship to the meanings that you have around it. And like, and in that, like you really see the wounds and the hurt, and it's like such a block to like what it can be for you, like
yeah, and also that it never has to be God.
Yeah, it
right?
doesn't
like,
have to.
I think that's like one of the things that I really want to drive home, because like you and Shaw are very comfortable with the word God,
yeah, right,
and so
the concept,
the word or the but it's more like the concept of God. And so like using the words for you that feel best for you. So like, the word that feels best for me or words rather, is like unconditional love, or like some people like to use like just the universe, or like universal energy, or universal consciousness is a term that I've heard as well. Just source, spirit, great mystery. There's also like, depending on your ethnicity, there's lots and lots and lots of different words across different ethnicities that might feel more aligned, or like just might resonate with you. Like whatever, but like for me, it just comes back to that idea of unconditional love. right? It's just like whatever, and that's why I just like the word unconditional love, like just the source of unconditional love. Like that's how I characterize it for me. Like I don't often use the word God like
Right.
when I'm feeling into that type of energy, when I'm thinking about it for myself, when I'm journaling about it, like rarely do I ever use the word God. I always say things like universal love or unconditional love or like universal energy or something like that, because like that's what resonates. That's the verbiage that resonates with me. And it's the same thing,
That's
like
what,
it's all
like,
the same. It's a,
yeah.
so, but it's just like, but if like God doesn't, if there's a block around that, and like Lee was saying, like if you want to, you know, um, un, un, what am I trying to say? If you want to look at what triggers you around the word God and then unpack that for yourself, you don't have to unpack that with the idea that you're going to then accept the word God,
Right.
but rather just noticing that you're triggered and being like, oh, that if I'm triggered, that means there's something here to heal.
Yeah,
So regardless of whether
it's just for you and like your sense of
yeah,
freedom and peace in the world, right?
yeah.
And but yeah, and like like yeah, for me, I use all the terms. I do. Like it's like for me, I'm like, what's the energy of what deity, God, spirit, source that I want? Like sometimes I'm like, what up, God? Let's do this. And then sometimes I'm like, oh spirit, oh universe, or like source, and like and I love learning about different cultures and things, what they bring in. I'm like, oh, that's really great. I love that. Like I'm like, it's all like a different vibe, different flavor for me. But I'm like, yeah, but all in the sense, it's all oneness, and like. The thing that was the other thing though, that just specifically for the queer community, something that I work a lot with my clients that want to have goals within their spiritual wellness. They're like, but what is spiritual? I'm like, like at the basic level for me, it really is just like connecting to something larger than yourself. It's like, it's not just you. Like that, it's not just you, right? And like in the queer community, like we have that when you have the queer community, like when you
totally,
like that
the
oneness,
connection and oneness in the community.
Like if you've gone to a queer event, like we've talked about on the podcast a number of times, like freaking Les Prom is a spiritual experience because you are connecting in that oneness, right? And it's like, I am free. I don't have to have the guard and the block and all that. Like that is a spiritual experience. Like, and it's not like you don't have to say God at all in that whole experience, right? Like, but like it just allows you to tap into what brings you into that sense of like, I am connected to something larger. There is something that is holding me. And sometimes that is through community, which is a big thing for queer folks, right? Like community is a big one. And so it's like something that has you work on your spiritual wellness is creating community, right? Like that is a spiritual thing, to create community. Sometimes it's through art, right? Like people creating art, it's like, I am connecting to something larger than me, right? Or music, writing, even just like something that puts you in flow. Like if you're just like, you love swimming and you just get in flow and swimming, like that feels like that spiritual experience because you're connecting something larger, right? And so it's really like, you don't have to make it about God at all or anything like that. It's just like, what is connecting you where you are feeling held, right? And you are feeling connected and you're not alone. That right there, and that is something that I hear all the time from queer folks, what they want. I don't want to feel alone. I want to feel connected. I want to feel unconditionally loved. It's like, what you are asking for is then a spiritual experience, right? And like like in that sense of like what is like the oneness, right? So it's like that kind of thing.
Yeah, I guess I'm just also being sensitive to the people who were like me,
Yeah, no, for sure.
And because I'm just like, man, like literally this would be so hard for me to talk about like 10 years ago.
Yeah.
And I would have been like fuck you, you're full of shit. So I guess if those people wouldn't be listening right now, would they?
I mean,
but like
maybe they made it this far.
I don't know. I don't know. But like I just want to be like sensitive to I'm feeling very called to be very sensitive to people who like need more baby steps than this.
For sure.
You know,
yeah.
and again, not to say that like you will ever be like a totally spiritual person if that's
Right.
not what you want to be. But like just thinking about it more in the way of like connection and flow
Mm-hmm.
and like the finding spaces and people and communities and practices that allow you to let go of all of preconceived notions, allow you to let your guard down even for a while, allow you to connect in with yourself and others, you know, like
Mm-hmm.
and so yeah, like not even needing to think about it in the terms of spirituality, but even just
Yeah.
thinking about it in the terms of connection. Also, I'm very aware of like time currently.
No, you're fine. No, but yeah, I mean, like, that's just like in that idea, though, it's like whatever you need it to leave it as, like, oh, I just have my community experience, and like, that's great. Then it's like, yeah, you don't have to like have like, I think it's more for me in the sense of recognizing that it's like, you know, that if you have that experience where you can let your guard down, you feel the love and everything, like being able to be open to the idea that for that, like that experience is someone else's spirituality, like where it's a very clear like spiritual experience, right? Like being open to that so that you can then go, oh yeah, all these spiritual people aren't dumb, right? Like in that sense, right? Like because it's like then it just
creating
allows
the bridge.
more, it connects, like right, like you don't have to call it a spiritual experience at all. You call it a community event. Great. Someone else that's there is having a spiritual experience, right? And you're having the same experience,
right?
But and it's like, you know, that's where we get lost in the language and terms. But it's just in that because I think that's part. It's an offering of healing for you in your relationship to spirituality to go, oh, this is what they are meaning. I don't have to see it as that in terms of myself. I don't have to say I'm a spiritual person now, but you can say, oh, this is what they're not, you know, these crazy people out there or whatever. It's like, this is what they're saying, just to feel loved, to feel connected. That's it. And it's like, and that allows you the healing around that term, language, whatever it is. And like in that, you just offer yourself more healing and go about your merry way. That said community event.
All right. And with that.
Oh my goodness. We love you.
We love you.
Send us all your questions. We hope you enjoyed this episode of the Queer Love Podcast. We would love to hear from you. Drop us a line on TikTok, Instagram, or Twitter at Queer Love Relationships, or email us at queerloverelationships@gmail.com.
If you are interested in working with us, follow the Linktree link in the show notes. See if our offers resonate with you, and if they do, sign up with us or book a discovery session.
We are so grateful that you're here, listening, learning, and growing with us.
Until next time, keep loving.